You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. I'm Jill Waterman, the show's creative producer. I'm also host of our new monthly series, Picturing World Cultures. How do you make pictures under conditions that might put the life of your subject at risk? What methods can you use to protect their identity and still create a compelling and dignified photograph? And what's it like to live and work in a country in the midst of cultural upheaval, failing infrastructure, and rife with political violence? These are just a few of the topics we cover with today's guest, photojournalist and visual storyteller Kiana Hayeri. Born in Iran and raised between Tehran and Toronto, Canada, Kiana first picked up a camera to bridge language and culture gaps when adapting to her new environment. She returned to Iran after college to work as a professional photographer, moving to Kabul, Afghanistan in 2014. She spent the next 8 years covering both the front lines of conflict and the everyday lives of the Afghan people as a regular contributor to publications such as the New York Times and National Geographic. Kiana is a senior TED Fellow and a National Geographic Explorer grantee. In 2021, she received the Robert Capa Gold Medal for her photographic series, Where Prison is a Kind of Freedom, documenting the lives of Afghan women in Herat prison. In 2022, Kiana received the Leica Oscar Barnack Award for her portfolio Promises Written on the Ice, Left in the Sun, an intimate look into Afghan lives from all walks of life. One editorial note. This episode was recorded last December, shortly before Kiana relocated from Afghanistan to Sarajevo. Kiana Hayeri, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jill. Good to be speaking.
So let's dive into the questions. You've lived in Afghanistan since 2014. Why did you decide to move there? Was it the prospect of assignment work or for other reasons?
The move came very naturally. After I finished university, I moved to Iran, trying to make it as a photographer there. And in summer of 2014, a group of my friends, including Jason Rezaian, the Washington Post correspondent in Tehran, they were arrested during a raid just before midnight. And my best friend was the photographer for the Washington Post. And I became very paranoid. 6 nights after that incident, I had an assignment in Afghanistan during one of the bloody periods. They had a lot of blasts, a lot of attacks after the presidential election. And ironically, I felt safer in Afghanistan. So I moved.
Wow. And what were you photographing?
That assignment was for an online publication called Matter. And it was on dating scene in Afghanistan. Because I had done a lot of work on youth in Iran, I think that's why the editor took the chance to send me to Afghanistan.
Yes, so you've spent a lot of time photographing youth culture, both in Iran and Afghanistan. What, if any, differences do you find there to be between youth in these two countries?
I mean, there is a lot of differences. They're two different cultures, even though they share the same language, perhaps a lot of cultural points like poetry, they watch the same films, but culturally they're very different. One thing that was very interesting to me was both countries are extremely young. At the time, they were like 50 and 70% below age of 25, 30, so extremely young countries. And despite the dark history and the oppression they had, both of the young population, they were very modern. They were very hopeful for the future. They were trying to change things. That being said, when I worked in Afghanistan in 2014 and then 15 with the young people, by the end of 15, a lot of these young people left Afghanistan. I moved to Afghanistan a month before NATO pulled out. And ever since then, Afghanistan has been on a downhill. And those very progressive, very hopeful young kids that I photographed in Afghanistan, it didn't take them that long to leave Afghanistan. And that was 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
With everything that has happened in the last year, things changed. At the same time, Iran, same thing. I think one thing these young people had in common, their use of their mobile phones, internet, social media, and their exposure to this greater world that is out there. That was a common point between them.
Yeah. You mentioned in a past interview people having a public side which follows religious and cultural traditions and a private side which is less observant. Is the same split present in both countries?
Absolutely. There is a tiny bit of difference though. First, it's like a generational thing. With what's happening on the streets of Iran, I'm learning the new generation in Iran is very different from my generation. But the difference is in Iran, the society and the family is very secular. They're very open minded. It's a government that is strict and oppressing people, imposing religion on them. In Afghanistan, up until the time that Taliban took over the country, it was the reverse. The government was installed by the Americans, so they were open minded, they were progressive, somewhat secular. The society is actually very conservative and imposes a lot of these restrictions. So the way this split worked in Afghanistan and Iran, it was different. In Iran, you lived your life inside homes. On the outside, you pretended. In Afghanistan, many, many, many times, you had the freedom on the street in cafes, but then when you would go home, you would follow certain rules and live that double life.
Interesting. Wow. So does your approach to making pictures change when photographing these two different sides of your subjects?
I wouldn't necessarily say my approach changes. One thing that I'm just conscious of is this photograph that I'm creating, is it going to put anyone in danger or not? And it's a lot of calculation in my head, especially now. Two things. One, I've become more accomplished. My work is seen everywhere. I have quite a bit of following on internet. Two, both countries are going through a period where there's so much uncertainty that even if I create a photo now, I don't know how things are going to be in 2 years. Forget about 2 years. I don't know where things are going to be in 1 month. And at the beginning, when I started my career, it was small. I had one project, two projects. I could keep in touch with everyone. But realistically, after 8 years, I can't keep track of everyone and where they are all the time. When I'm creating a photograph, I have to do the calculation in my head. What's the consequences of this photo getting out there? Is anyone going to be in danger or not?
Yeah, so are there things that you do compositionally to try to minimize risk for the subjects?
Yeah, I mean, compositionally, with the light, whether you're showing the location, yeah, a lot of things.
Mm. And in the majority of your work, your subjects are not looking into the lens. Is that part of your strategy? Is that a purposeful decision on your part?
I mean, that's how I photograph. I have an obsession with window frames. And I also see photograph as a window frame. And I like being a bystander and just watching what's happening in the room. That whole argument of our photograph subjective or objective, there is not such a thing as objective photography. You enter a room, you immediately you're changing the dynamic of the room. Immediately these people are aware of your presence, especially with a big camera. That I've accepted, but at least with the way I photograph and trying to capture those moments where people are less attentive or they're not looking at the camera, I try to give that experience of being a bystander to the viewer.
So, what kind of risks do you face in making pictures in Afghanistan? And what measures do you take to minimize risk, both for yourself and your subjects?
That's a very complex question. So I think the risks that we had before the fall of Afghanistan and after. Before fall of Afghanistan, we have an active war. There were conflict, there were suicide bombing. It was a lot of those kind of risks that we were facing. But once it becomes part of your daily life, you kind of live with it. The only thing you do to minimize the risk is do calculations in your head. Is this place going to be targeted? If they do, is there an escape way? How am I going to minimize my exposure to risk? So if you're showing up at a suicide bombing site, usually there's a secondary suicide bombing. So you make your time short, you move really quickly, you look out for signals that tells you something bad is going to happen. So that was before the fall. After fall of Afghanistan, the last year and a half, the dynamic has changed so fast that every month working in Afghanistan has been a different way of working. In early days, there was no danger at all. Access was great. There was no aggression, nothing. Then what happened with the US withdrawal came ordinary people feeling angry towards foreigner, right? And I'm Iranian and I speak the language. I've been there long enough that sometimes I blend in. So it was like, okay, I'm going to be local. And then as time passed by, with the society closing off to women and Taliban imposing all these rules, which many Afghan men love to follow, me being present in a room was a threat. Then I changed my strategy. I became foreigner. I wore very colorful clothes, made it very clear that I'm a foreigner.
Interesting.
Yeah, that has changed.
Wow. So when you're out photographing, do you ever travel alone or are you always escorted by fixers or colleagues from media outlets?
That also has changed a lot. Before the fall, I traveled alone quite a lot. I would have drivers when I go to provinces, or if I go to southern or eastern part of Afghanistan, which they're Pashto speaking, I always had a colleague with me. But then as much as I could, I tried to keep the team small and just travel alone. Or if I'm on assignment, there's always a reporter, and often the reporter is a foreigner, so we have a translator, so the team grows. But if I'm working by myself, if I'm doing the reporting and photos, I try to be. Since the fall, in early days, it was fine. But then now it's a different calculation in my head. I go to places where I can't disclose that I'm Iranian, that I do not want to speak Farsi, because immediately they would assume if you're from Iran, you're definitely Muslim. Why are you alone? You need to have a man with you. So since the fall, I definitely always have somebody with me, even if I don't need someone to translate. Inside homes, I'm always alone. Inside closed spaces, it's always on the street that I need somebody accompanying me. But in closed spaces, I love being alone and getting intimate with people.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So in terms of access, what are your most effective channels for arranging access to photograph people? And what types of research or advanced preparation do you undertake?
I guess access in every part of the world is different. I yet have to experience how does it work in a Western country. But in Afghanistan, usually if you're introduced by somebody that your subjects know and trust, the access is better. So I always like to find subjects. I figure out the story, what it is, and then I start reaching out to people that I know or guessing locations where it can lead me to that access, right? Like showing up at a cemetery or at a hospital. You just work that out. There's no one rule. I think one thing that journalists are always good at is problem solving and finding solution, finding access.
So once you've connected with a subject, how much of your time is devoted to photography versus establishing a connection and a comfort level with them?
Depends on what I'm shooting or what am I hoping to get. Time is a luxury in Afghanistan because of the dangers that are out there, and because nowadays Taliban generally they don't like journalists, so your time can be limited. So you can show up to a place and I don't know how much time I have. I have to immediately get to work. Or I can go to places that are somehow enclosed. So I have some immunity from the outside world. And that's when I know I can spend time. And with those stories that I need to reach a certain level of intimacy, often I have my camera on my shoulder, sitting down with them. Again, depends. If I'm in a hospital, I probably won't have more than 10 minutes. But if I'm in a prison, I know I have the luxury of time. So I spend more time with my subjects and get close to them.
Do you do much advanced connecting work, either online or by phone, to build up the level of comfort before you actually meet someone? Is that a strategy that works?
Not in Afghanistan. I mean, online doesn't really work because more than half of the country don't even have access to internet. And then over the phone, yes and no, it depends on the subject matter. But I've learned even if on the phone they say no to me, I always take the chances to show up to the place and sit face to face. I've learned my smile does magic. I've learned the way you hold yourself, you carry yourself. And these are not the things that get through on a phone conversation. Those things change the dynamic. So So even if I get no on the phone, I just insist, can I just like show up and meet with you for 5 minutes? And a lot of the times, like half of the times, that changes access.
Do you show pictures to people when you are meeting them, trying to engage them in letting you take pictures? Is that effective?
No, I never share photos with my subject. The only times that I show my subject what I'm photographing, it's like sensitive subject matters where often women or sometimes men who are prosecuted, they don't want to show their identity. Even if they say yes to going in front of my camera, there's a lot of tension, right? You could even see it in their body, how they're holding themselves. So usually in those cases, I take a couple of photos, I turn the camera, I show it to them what I'm photographing and how I'm trying to protect their identity. And that changes. That is the only exception when I'm showing photos. Otherwise, I feel like when subjects see their own photos, they become conscious and they lose part of that feeling natural.
Right. Yeah. So what gear are you currently working with? Cameras and lenses?
I have been using Nikon for many years, perhaps over 10 years. My kit is very minimal. For all those people who are very geeky about cameras, I just have a D850 and I have two lenses. Often just in my bag have one, the 24-70 f 2.8, and I do have a 35 millimeter f 1.4. But that one, when I'm on assignment, I don't take it out with me. I'm usually on the Zoom. That has been my kit for many, many years and previous generations of Nikon cameras. Until recently, I won Leica Oscar Barnack Award.
Right.
And I now have a Leica camera, which is very different from Nikon, and I'm trying to learn how to use it. So it still hasn't made it into my day-to-day gear, but it will eventually.
Yeah, congratulations on that. What model Leica did you get?
I have a M11 with my name engraved on it.
Nice. That is special. So what lenses do you have for your Leica?
I just have a 35 millimeter right now.
So do you ever use flash or other accessories?
No, I mean, in documentary world, you try to lay low. I don't use flash. Everything is lit naturally. I try to carry as little gear as possible just to be able to move fast.
So when working in Afghanistan, are there situations where being seen with camera gear is problematic? And how do you keep a low profile when transporting your gear?
Again, this goes into like before the fall and after the fall. Before the fall, we have gone to do reporting in areas that at the time was controlled by the Taliban. So you had to conceal your identity and being a journalist. I've had instances where I had my camera in like little purse that you buy in a local market just to look like an Afghan. I wore burqa to conceal my identity. My camera bag up until very recently was a very rugged camera bag that looked very old. This is me being cautious. Generally, I don't carry my camera on my shoulder. It's always in my bag, so I can quickly take it out. And I am very much looking forward to using my Leica, which is very small and low profile.
How feasible is it to travel within Afghanistan to photograph different places? Are there areas that are off limits?
There were many areas off limits before the fall because they were controlled by the Taliban and just getting access was near to impossible. Since the fall, because the very same people who were after our lives are now ruling the country, I would say anywhere in Afghanistan is accessible in terms of safety. There are places where traveling is very difficult because of the roads, or some areas not a good idea to travel to because of thieves and criminals, but generally access has been great.
And how easy is it to get around? Is the infrastructure there to travel easily?
Not at all. No. Most flights have been cancelled since the fall. Before the fall, we had flights to many places, but then you couldn't drive around the country because parts of the road was controlled by the Taliban, or Taliban would set up random checkpoints on the road. But after the fall, any infrastructure that existed has vanished, basically. There are only flights to 3 cities in 35 provinces. And then from there, it's just a lot of driving. Roads are terrible, long hours. I remember we were on a story for the New York Times in a very, very remote area. So we had 16 hours of traveling to Balkhab and just a day in Balkhab. And as we were emerging out of the valley and we were getting reception, we learned earthquake had hit eastern Afghanistan. and many people died. So we went straight from Balkhab to Khostan Pakhtia in the east. I actually did the calculation. In 5 days we were on the road. We drove over 54 hours.
Aside from Kabul, do you have a favorite part of Afghanistan?
I really love Badakhshan, which is in northeast of Afghanistan. It's that little stretch that goes out and it has border with Pakistan, Tajikistan, and China. And it's the backdrop to many of those National Geographic photographs from Afghanistan. It's beautiful. And people from Badakhshan are just amazing.
So we're going to take a short break, and when we return, we'll have more with Kiana Hayeri.
I hope you're enjoying my chat with Kiana Hayeri for my monthly series, Picturing World Cultures. I'd really love to hear your thoughts about the episode, so please leave a rating and post a review on Apple Podcasts. If you missed my conversation with Australian photographer Wayne Quilliam in our first Picturing World Cultures episode, check it out in your favorite podcast app. And stay tuned for our next episode featuring my conversation with Indonesian photographer Joshua Irwandi, which drops Thursday, February 1st.
Okay, we are back with Kiana Hayeri. So, Kiana, you describe Afghanistan as a country of extremes. How do you maintain clarity and focus when photographing in such challenging and chaotic environments?
I think when you're in it, it's actually easy to stay focused and clear because you're so stimulated. You've got the adrenaline in your blood. When I'm photographing, when I'm on assignment, when I'm in the field, I'm very sharp, very clear. I know what I'm doing. Losing that sense of clarity, meaning having a foggy brain, usually comes afterwards. It's when I'm editing photos or after I'm on a break. It's usually when all those things come back to me. I haven't found that perfect recipe for it, but I've learned doing like little mindful things is great. Allowing myself to feel and experience what I need to feel and experience after covering something very traumatic is important. Not that I'm the best at this, but I've learned taking breaks is very important because you lose sense of normalcy when you're in that environment for too long. And when you're there for too long, coming out of it is more difficult.
After the fact, when you're editing your pictures, is that a difficult process for you? Do you start to edit your pictures right away? Or do you need some break time to sit back and let the experience settle when it's not a deadline-driven situation?
If I'm not pressing against deadline, I much rather have a little bit of time between shooting the assignment and editing it. Whether the assignment was difficult or not, it just allows you to see better and edit better. And if I'm covering something difficult, yes, editing is always the hardest part of the assignment. Because when you're in it, when you're shooting, you don't really think too much about what's happening in front of your camera. It's usually when you come home, all those things come back to you, all those feelings weigh you down, and then you're looking through the photos and re-experiencing the day.
Yeah, so your work ranges from conflict photography to very poignant stories about women and children. Does your approach differ between those two extremes? For example, a preference for posed versus candid situations, or in terms of composition and cropping?
I don't do composed images unless I'm doing portraits. When I'm doing portraits, I do direct my subject to sit and move. But otherwise, it's all documentary. It's all as it happens. I mean, definitely when you're on the front line or in a dangerous situation, you work much faster. And a lot of time, you don't have the luxury of like composing the photo that you want to compose, right? Taking the time and make sure the composition is perfect or the light is perfect. You have to work with whatever is available. Whereas if I'm shooting life stories, I can choose what time of the day I can go back, what kind of light I get. In those circumstances, I try to control it a little bit. For example, if I'm visiting a family, I'll ask them if I can go while they're having dinner instead of like midday when everybody going to sleep.
I noticed there was an older series you did on child soldiers, for example, where the cropping was very extreme to try to protect the identity of the subjects. Is that something that would factor in a lot with the more conflict-oriented work that you do?
In that case, we were dealing with minors and we were dealing with soldiers, like minors who are fighting. So it was very important to protect their identity, both from those who probably are after them, being the government or the Taliban, but also like these young kids didn't have a choice. They were all let into this war. And right now I'm working on a large series for New York Times. Should be out in January. And it involves photographing a lot of women who choose not to show their faces and protect their identity. It's been very challenging to photograph 100 women, and many of them you have to do it facelessly and still be creative, still make beautiful photographs and make them look different. So besides from cropping, I've been using a lot of fabrics, shadows, creative ways of concealing their identities.
Most of your pictures also convey a strong sense of place. When you're planning the pictures, do you seek out the environment first and then pose the person, or wait for them to fall into place? Or is the person and their expression the most important thing that you're seeking?
I think it depends on the story you're trying to tell. Sometimes the story is tied to a place, and in those circumstances, you have to establish that space. Again, I never pose my subject. So if it's in a space, I always follow them into that space. I think one thing Afghanistan has done to me, actually two things. One, I've become very patient. And then two, I work much faster. So I enter a room, I usually scan it to see where is the light that I want to photograph. And then I hang around in that space until something happens. If the light is good, I know the photos are going to be good, no matter what.
Right. I want to go back for a minute to what you were just describing, the series that you're working on for the New York Times. Would you say you being a woman photographer is an advantage in the current environment? When is it advantageous and when is it problematic?
I'm going to use a term that someone else has come up with, and I remember I read it in an article many, many, many years ago. In places like Afghanistan or Middle East, women are third gender, meaning that up until fall of Afghanistan, I could cover everything that men covered, as well as everything in female-dominated spaces. So I had access to both sides. Since fall of Afghanistan, with Taliban having the mentality they have and their view of women, my access has been cut massively. And this is something I've discussed with fellow female journalists and photographers. But I would argue as a woman, still I have more access than a man does. It's just certain things, especially in relation to Taliban, they're not comfortable being around a woman.
Interesting. So those pictures that you're currently working on, a man would not be able to be taking those pictures, correct?
Many of those women would have not allowed to be photographed by a man, but also the way they're being photographed is different. You know, some of these women, they wear burqa on a day-to-day basis. Burqa is that blue garment that Afghan women wear. If a man entered the room, these women will refuse to even lift their burqa. So the man has to photograph them in burqa. But with me, I'm able to convince them to lift the front of the burqa. I would still conceal their identity, but at least you see a little bit of the scarf they're wearing underneath or the clothes they're wearing. So it gives them a bit of personality. But with a man, that's impossible.
So what's the most important thing you look for at the instant when you click the shutter?
Emotions or feelings. And if there's no human being in that photo or nobody from a close atmosphere, it's the feeling that I try to convey with that photograph.
So are there specific moments or situations you avoid photographing, or pictures that could be problematic to make due to cultural sensitivities?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like that's like a daily challenge in Afghanistan. I have a rule of thumb. I always say, if I don't want to be seen in that position, I'm not going to photograph that. So I've photographed many births in Afghanistan. I've photographed very graphic scenes after attacks. And I always like put myself in the shoe of the subject. Do I want to be seen like this or not? It's about photographing people, even in the worst times, with grace, with dignity. Generally, I'm against photographing dead bodies or graphic images, because I think we're not adding anything to this world. There are some instances where dead bodies need to be photographed just as a document of what has happened. But if you're trying to tell a story, I feel like that can be communicated without showing very graphic scenes. So I avoid doing that. And I've done it. And there are times when you're in it, I can make decisions. So I make the photo with the graphic scenes and without. And then later I sit with it and decide what I want to show.
Mm-hmm. That's really great advice about putting yourself in front of the viewfinder. So let's talk about your project photographing in the Herat women's prison. You spent 2 weeks inside working in the prison. How did you gain access to such an impenetrable environment?
I worked with a fixer who knew people in the office of the prosecutor in Herat. The prosecutor arranged me meeting with the general manager of the prison, and then he passed me on to the management of the female prison. I had visited that prison once before, but I only probably had like an hour in the prison before anything happened. I made it clear that I need to go for more than like a few hours. I would like to go a day or two to meet the prisoners. The first day, I had a policewoman with me all the time. And I think as I was navigating the space and going from one room to another, I barely took any photos. I just sat with people, talked with them, got their stories. And I think that changed the dynamics. And the prison manager trusted me. She asked me to go back again. And then I said, I'm going back to Kabul, but I'm going to come back. And eventually, by the end of the assignment, I spent 15 days in total, over 3 trips to Herat and 1 sleepover at the prison.
Wow. So the sleepover, was it just one night that you were there?
Yes, because at night they lock the doors and no one's allowed to come out of their cells. I realized there was barely any photos, so I didn't repeat it. But initially the plan was to sleep over a few nights.
And were you locked in one of the cells with some of the women?
No, I was on the outside. I was with the prison manager.
You mentioned the fixer. How many different fixers do you work with? How do you find the fixers that you work with, and how extensive is that network?
I generally try to avoid using the word fixer, but most of the local colleagues that I work with have left Afghanistan by now, which I understand and respect. But before the fall, in every province, I had multiple fixers because each person has got different sets of skills and different contacts. If you're working with the Taliban, you need certain type of fixer. If you're working with young people, you need certain type of fixers. And the credit of a lot of the stories that we work on goes to our local colleagues because they are the ones who put themselves on the front of everything. It's their reputation, their lives that they risk. And I have a lot of respect for that.
What about the media outlets that you're connected with? When we were first communicating, you mentioned if we spoke when you were in Afghanistan, you'd have to be in the office. What office would that be?
I started working for the New York Times in 2018. I also work for the National Geographic. I'm still a freelancer. And the office that I was referring to was Kabul's New York Times bureau.
Back to the women's prison, you describe the women as having a sense of freedom while inside the prison. Do you feel that carried over in your pictures?
Definitely. This was my first assignment with the New York Times. We shot it back in 2019. So every few days I would send an edit to my editor. And if you look at the photos, it doesn't look like a prison. Women are wearing normal clothes. It looks like a dormitory with like colorful walls and curtains and textile. And it was one of the challenges because my editor kept pushing me is like, but we need to see this as a prison. And I was like, well, this is the prison. It doesn't look like a prison, but that's it. That was the whole point of the story. And I remember one specific scene while I was inside the prison, one of the girls' sentence was over and she was being released. And other women were celebrating. They were threading her face. They were putting on makeup. And she was so sad. She was so sad to be leaving the prison because she said her house was more of a prison. Her brother was going to lock her inside the house and just allow her to go to university. Whereas inside the prison, she had that freedom. She could put on makeup, go to classes that was run by an NGO, play volleyball, laugh, all of that. She had none of that outside.
So was this particular prison sort of a different example than other prisons in Afghanistan?
Yes, I think one of the reasons they gave me access at that prison is because it's very well kept, whereas a Polichaki prison in Kabul, it's notorious. It's a proper prison.
And you mentioned in your Kickstarter campaign that 3 days before the Taliban took over, the women in Herat prison were set free. Do you know what's become of them? And have you been able to keep in touch with any of them?
I am in close contact with one of the women who I became very close with after I left the prison. She was very special. I actually did a follow-up story when she was released. She was released before Taliban took over. I became very close to her and her teenage girls. And after Afghanistan fell, I got involved with their case personally, and with the help of an amazing group of strangers, we managed to get them out. They are currently in Canada. Daily, I'm in touch with her, and she's in touch with many of the women that I photographed. So she's my source of news. Oh, this woman is here, that one is left, that one is back in the prison.
Mm-hmm. And how have conditions changed in the prison since?
It's nothing like before. I actually interviewed a young woman who was arrested about 2 months after the fall and was in that prison for about 30 days. And it's horrendous. They have solitary confinement there. They beat women up. They've closed half of the buildings and pushed everyone in small rooms, like as many as 20, 30 women in one room. It's changed.
So you left Afghanistan when the Taliban took over, but you've since returned and have been living there for more than a year. How were you able to get back into the country?
I mean, some people never left, including my partner. He stayed throughout the fall, and I left on the day for two different reasons. One, by the time Afghanistan fell, I was completely burnt out. And I knew if I push a little bit longer, I may break in a way that I could never recover. Two, I think on the day, nobody really knew what was going to happen. And as women, you're exposed to certain risks. So I left because of those reasons. And I'm very happy because eventually I saw my mom, and shortly after she passed away.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. I went back 6 weeks after the fall, and many journalists by that time had already returned. It's just, I think on that day, nobody really knew how it was going to play out and what it meant that Taliban was going to take over. So I went back.
Mm-hmm. And there were no issues with getting back in as a journalist?
No, if anything, in those early days, it was very easy. They're making it more and more difficult week after week.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel there's a greater risk to being there now than before the country fell?
I mean, depends how you define risk. Risk of any of us getting killed or injured, no, that's near to zero. I think the worst thing that can happen is I just get arrested for a few hours or a few days and then kicked out of the country. However, I think the greater risk is the risk we're putting Afghans in, being our local colleagues and our subjects. And that is a very complicated calculation you have to do, because if anything happens to you, you're responsible. But when you have the responsibilities of others, that's very difficult.
Yeah.
Morally, that makes for a very heavy weight hanging over your head.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Kiana, for sharing your perspective on the culture of Afghanistan and your insights on making pictures there. But before we go, I'd like to end with a visual questionnaire inspired by the TV show Inside the Actor's Studio. It's a short list of questions with one-sentence answers. So, Kiana Hayeri, with all things being equal, what is your preference, color or black and white?
Color.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely for your work. And which image orientation do you gravitate to most? Horizontal or vertical or square?
Horizontal. And then square comes next.
And what's your lens preference, prime or zoom?
Prime.
If you could only carry one lens, which would it be?
35.
What one photographer, living or dead, has influenced your work the most?
That is tough and nearly impossible. You can't say just one photographer. It's impossible.
Okay, can you name top 3?
Top 3: Andrea Bruce, Kitra Kahana, and Daniel Berahulak.
So outside of photography, what profession or craft would you most like to explore?
I'm getting into pop-up book. Always as a kid, I had an obsession, and I'm now trying to make my own pop-up.
Nice. I love pop-up books. Yeah. In a single word, what's your biggest motivation for making pictures?
Experience.
So you're about to head to Australia for the holidays, where you'll be spending the next month. Are there projects you'll be working on there?
No, I'm just working on my book. So I'll be remotely editing and working on that.
Cool. That's a big, important project. And I'm going to look forward to seeing it when it comes out.
Will you be returning to Afghanistan after your Australia trip?
Yes. So as of September, I've shifted my home away from Afghanistan. So I'll be doing a lot of trips in and out. I'm pretty sure after Australia, at some point, I will have to go back, but we're setting up a new home in Sarajevo. So I will be in between those places.
Interesting. And are there upcoming projects you can tell us about? Any other assignments you're working on that you can mention?
The one that I can talk about is the women's project we're doing for the New York Times. The idea is very simple. We spoke to 100 women across Afghanistan to see how the last 1.5 years have been for them. That will take time for it to come out because I've done the reporting and we're making an interactive special design for the website. So that will keep me busy.
Yeah. And where can guests find out more about you and your work?
I do have a website, kianahayeri.com, but also I'm quite active on Instagram.
So Kiana Hayeri, thank you again for joining us today and introducing us to your work.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, we'd love to hear about it. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a comment. We're waiting for your feedback. You can also find us on the Explora blog, where we post photos from our guests along with the show notes. And if you're a fan of social media, please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast group, where you can share your favorite photos and comment about the show. I'm Jill Waterman, the podcast creative producer and host of this series. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein. And thanks again to our B&H colleague Gabriel Richards, who composed the music for this series. Executive producer for this episode is Yermi Weiss, and our editorial director is Sean Steiner. On behalf of us all, thank you so much for joining us on this show.